Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Rogue Agent Answers. My name is the Rogue Agent. Some people call me David Lewis, and every week I answer one of the many life insurance related questions that I've received from clients, from email subscribers on the daily email list, questions floated to me from across the interwebs, in the comments sections, which I know you're not supposed to read, or just interactions that I've had with people in real life over the past 20 years, which is a long time. And some of these questions I just scribbled down on scrap pieces of paper. Some of these are stuff I've written down on my phone. Some of it is on Post-it notes scattered all over the office. And every week I answer one of those questions. So if you'd like to ask your question, drop them in the comments section or join my email list for more life insurance tips and advice at monogenics.com. monegenics.com. And now for this week's question.
What does IRR mean on my policy illustration? Okay, so IRR stands for internal rate of return. It's the equivalent rate of return that you would need to achieve outside the policy to have the cash values listed in your policy, if that makes sense. I know the wording is kind of strange, but the way that the insurance companies define it is the equivalent rate of return that you would need if you were investing somewhere else to equal the cash values in your policy that's on your illustration. So it's basically either very close to or equivalent to the compound annual growth rate of your policy is what it is for that year, going all the way back to year one. So if you look at the IRR in year, basically let me say this first. So in a life insurance policy, that IRR is going to change every year because of the way cash values build up inside the policy and also the way the dividends are paid. And then it's retro. And so as you look at every year, the values are changing. And so the IRR number listed in the year, if you look at the internal rate of return report on a policy illustration, that IRR figure is changing each year. And so the issue is that people get confused by this because they think that is the rate of return in that year, and that's not what that means. You basically you have to look at it as a cumulative annual return. So, and it's also IRR is also retroactive to year one, and in addition to being specific for that end year that you're looking at. So, for example, if your policy shows an IRR of, let's say 4% in year 20, it means that the cash value in the 20th year is equal to a 20-year compound annual return of 4%. So even on the illustration, especially with both whole life and universal life, it's you always see negative first year returns just because of the way that insurance companies front load the expenses in a policy. But by year 20th, with that let's say a 4% return in year 20, what that means is that if you went all the way back to year one and then compounded it all the way through to year 20, that it would be equal to a 4% year over year, starting in year one, year over year 4% return to get to the final value in the 20th year. So, because it's not a linear growth that most people are familiar with, like with investments or interest-bearing accounts. So it's essentially, in the first year, 2 years or whatever, 3 years or whatever, where it's showing you negative annual. And then on the back end after that, it has to be way higher than that to average out to that 4% compound annual growth. If you go ahead 1 year then, and so in year 21, your IRR might show 4.10. That means that the cash value in the 21st year is equal to a 21-year compound annual return of 4.1%. Again, so in the 21st year, you go all the way back to year one, and then you start compounding, and you get to the 21st year, it would take a 4.1% return to equal the cash values in that 21st year. So it's that total annual return or total compound annual return is changing each year. I understand this can be, kind of confusing since the way it's listed in the report makes it seem like the IRR for that year is how much the policy earned in that year. There's actually a separate report on the insurance companies are providing now. It's called the net annual growth rate, which shows the effective annual growth. That is a year by year, like this is what your policy earned this year, this is what your policy earned this year, so on and so forth. But as far as IRR is concerned, that's looking at the cumulative total return over a specified number of years that ends in the current year that you're looking at. So if now, again, I said that insurance companies now are providing what's an annual net growth. So the annual net growth would be a separate report, or sometimes they include it right on the illustration right in there. That's a separate report. It's usually included, in a supplemental report that shows how much your policy made year over year. And that's good. That will tell you that's separate from the IRR report. So this would be something people are probably more familiar with because it looks more like, what they're used to seeing when they see, annual rates of return. So rate of return, which, I know it's fun to look at, but, personally, I wouldn't get too hung up on it. It does matter, but it's not the be all end all, especially with life insurance, because of how the policies work. It's, if you're buying life insurance as an investment, first of all, you're buying it for the wrong reasons. It has a different function. It has an important function in your financial plan, but it's a different function. And I include both term and whole life in that. And it's hedging certain kinds of risk that you can't do in a different way. And so a lot of people get hung up on rate of return on cash values, and they kind of miss the bigger picture of what the insurance is doing. And so, it's certainly not worth chasing a few percentage points here and there. And people do this, and agents on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, they make these videos that are really, I don't know. I think they're appealing to that sort of short-term mentality of rate of return, and what's it doing this year? What's it doing this year? And what's the return? They're so focused on that. And if you start chasing rate of return, some weird and funky things start happening later on in the policy. So just remember cash value of your policy. If you buy a whole life policy, the cash value of that policy is guaranteed to equal the death benefit at age 121. You're really buying death benefit and then building up cash value to equal that death benefit in the future. If you die before you get to use all that money, it goes to your heirs, which is the point of the policy. Otherwise, it's yours to spend. And that's the benefit of having a cash value policy, that you have, a value while you're alive. That cash value is there for you to use before you die. So if you want more money in your policy, I've heard people say, I want to do infinite banking, or I want to do, retirement planning or something with this. I want the lowest death benefit, squeeze it way down. I'm going to pump a whole bunch of premium. If you buy $1 million policy, your policy is guaranteed to be worth $1 million in the future. If you buy a $500,000 policy, it's worth $500,000. Yes, dividends add to that, paid up additions add to that. But if you're talking about in the grand scheme of things, you're looking at the policy, the base, which is what the paid up additions are built on top of. If you're looking at the policy, the face amount and so on, the bigger that face amount, the more premium you have to put in, and the bigger your cash values are. So people treat it as two separate things. Like, I want to squeeze down the death benefit and jack up the cash value. You can't do that because they're inextricably tied to one another. The cash value, I don't know. It's surprisingly, this is stuff that agents ought to know. They ought to know. They do know, but or they ought to know anyway. I don't blame the consumer so much because they're not really taught this, but especially with whole life insurance, the cash value is the net present value of the death benefit. That means whatever the death benefit is, that's where your cash value is going. Your cash value grows until it equals the death benefit in the future. So if you want a bigger cash value, you've got to buy a bigger death benefit. And then, of course, piling on paid up additions on top of that, and so on and so forth. So it really comes down to, getting the budget right for the premium and so on, but buying the most amount of death benefit you can afford to buy. And if you want to have high cash value policy, you got to also budget in, okay, how much money am I going to also be able to put into paid up additions and factor that into things. But all the other things being equal, bigger death benefit equals more cash value, not smaller death benefit. Smaller death benefit means smaller policy, which means smaller cash value. So just remember that. as long as the policy is designed properly, then your policy will maximize the cash value and death benefit that you can accumulate in that policy over your lifetime. So rather than think about rate of return, just think about total dollar amounts. So this ain't an investment. People have to get away from this whole life insurance as an investment thing. It's a hedge. It's a financial hedge. It's a very valuable thing. But it's different from an investment. It produces a rate of return. Sometimes that rate of return is competitive with more traditional investment. I've seen life insurance policies outperform traditional investments, but you have to keep in mind that the way it functions, it's not an investment. It doesn't. There's certain ways in which it functions that it's not an investment. So I get the thing where people are concerned about rate of return. Do not get hung up on it. Don't obsess over this. It's not an investment. It's a guaranteed savings and insurance policy. So if you want $1 million, if you want $1 million saved up by age 65, then what you do is you target that cash value dollar amount at age 65, and then, build the rest of the death benefit and so on around that, and make it happen. The rest of it, premiums, growth rate, et cetera, it just takes care of itself. So when you do this, your financial plan is much, much, much simpler and much more straightforward. You're not playing any games. You're not, other than the dividend payments, which are not guaranteed, and those can be variable. But basically, there's no, outside of that, there's no hypotheticals to stress out about. The policy is a zero vol asset, to sort of offset the high vol that people are doing in equities or whatever else. If they're trading equities or options or doing real estate or forex or whatever people are doing for their high volatility assets. The point of the life insurance is supposed to be a zero vol asset, zero volatility, so that you can afford to take more risk elsewhere. You're hedging against financial risks. You need money. The cash value is there to leverage, to borrow against in case you need it. So you don't have to cash out your other investments or take on debt with a credit card or bank or something like that. And you can afford to kind of go headlong into really great investments without worrying about what if something happens and I need money? That's what the insurance is there for. Okay. So I get the whole thing about rate of return. Don't get obsessed about it. Yes, it's there. And that's what IRR helps you kind of understand is what the total compound return is on cash values. You look at IRR too, they have it worked out so you can see the IRR on your death benefit. So it's not just cash values. They show IRR for cash values and death benefit, but that's what it is. It's just to show you the total compound annual return on the premiums that you've been putting in. Anyway, that's all I got for this week's question. Hope that helps, and I will see you next week with hopefully another answer to another great question. Thanks again.
Okay, that's it for this week's question. If you'd like to add your question to the list, just drop them in the comment section or send me an email. And if you want more life insurance tips and advice, just head on over to monogenics.com, MONEGENIX.com, and sign up for my daily email list.